Good evening. This is Rabbi Chaim, Brovender, the Rosh Yeshiva, the WebYeshiva. We're going to talk a little bit about tonight about Yom HaAtzmaut. When you tell a story, we learned that on Pesach. We learned about telling a story because that's the mitzvah that is connected particularly with Pesach. Tell the story. So we said that in order to tell the story, you have to know where to begin. I mean, every story is a story because it begins and then it continues. But you have to know where to begin. So the Mishnah says, the Mishnah Psachim says, Matchil bignut umesayem b'shvach. The way you tell the story is you sort of say that it's not the way, it was not the way it should be. Mesayem b'shvach means it got better. So we know when we tell a story, we want it to have an effect on us. We want it to shape the future. That's why we tell the story. We don't tell the story just because it's a good story. We tell the story because it's going to help us shape the future. And that's why we have to know where the story begins. So on Pesach, we have several beginnings, and they're all correct. One beginning is, we were slaves to Paro in Mitzrayim. That was the situation. That's the beginning of the story. But there's another story that begins, Mitchila Obdei Avodah Zarah Yovatenu. We were all idolaters. We inherited the genetic makeup of the idolaters. And so we spend our lives trying to overcome who we had become. So there are at least two beginnings that are connected to the Mishnah that we learned. Rab and Shmuel and Moraim disagree, or maybe they don't disagree. Maybe each one just mentioned a possibility, but they both agreed that the other side is also possible. So that you could start the story from Mitchila of the Avodah Zarah, you could start the story from Avadei Mayinu L'Paro Mitzrayim. And we know there's another beginning to the story. And the other beginning to the story is Arami Oved Avi, Abat Lavan, who tried to destroy Yaakov and his family. And we managed to overcome somehow, and that whole family made it to Egypt, where the nation of Israel was reformulated and became possible for them to leave Egypt and get the Torah. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. If you want to talk about Yom HaAtzmaut, you have to decide where the story begins. And the story begins, I think, in a variety of misery. I mean, if you have time to learn the history of Russia and the history of the Jews in Russia, the history of Western Europe and the Jews of Western Europe, World War I, the interim years between World War I and World War II, you'll see that things were not as they should be. They're matchil bignut. Matchil bignut means the world was difficult. It's hard to understand how people were able to live through the difficulties of those years. The larger nations that the Jews populated were in turmoil, and the Jews in turn became in turmoil. The ones who were the fortunate ones managed to go between World War I and World War II, managed to get to America or to Canada. And there they discovered that keeping Shabbos, for example, was not one of the ideals of the people who lived in those countries. So that it became difficult. And within this difficulty, some people Some people said, let's make a nation. Let's get territory. Let's build ourselves a defense against the world that is trying to do us in. That's a good beginning. That's a good beginning for the story about Yom HaAtzmaut, because that's what Yom HaAtzmaut is. It's the day that is built upon the story. And if you don't know the story, you don't really understand the day. Because we live in a world of Hester Panim. Hester Panim means we tend not to take it seriously. We tend to reject the fact that it's all quite amazing. We tend to deny the fact that you could call it a miracle because we are not prepared for it. We're not prepared to live in the world of miracles. So we kind of deny it. So we tell the story from the beginning, but we tell it in a different way. We say, oh, it wasn't so bad. It was something that we were able to, it was something we were able to forget about. We're able to forget about it. We forget about the beginning of the story. There's no story. There's no story. All we have left is the difficulties of the moment. And we have no way of overcoming for ourselves those difficulties by telling the story. And the story has been told many times, and it seems to me that it's a true story. The truth of the story is that Israel is strong, economically viable, has managed to integrate a lot of different Jews into a national entity which is in many respects quite remarkable. I don't say this in order to congratulate anybody or to make the feel good, but this is the story. This is the story of Yom HaAtzmaut. Yom HaAtzmaut was the culmination of a terrible period and the beginning of a wondrous period. And that's the story. That's the story that you could tell. If you're interested, and I know that Jews, being the way we are, argumentative, unhappy with ourselves, sometimes wondering how could it be, and we actually create very remarkably difficult positions for ourselves. I mean, it's hard to believe. It's hard to believe what people say about what we say about ourselves. But you have to remember that our history is a weight that we carry with us. We're suspicious. We don't always recognize the glory of the moment. We're not always involved in telling the story. I mean, the Torah says, Zecher liYetziat Mitzrayim. You have to remember Yetziat Mitzrayim again and again, all the time if you can. I think you should remember Yom HaAtzmaut again and again, maybe all the time, wherever you can. Because it's just the same people created the state of Israel as the people who live here today. And if the people who live here today don't get along with each other, don't seem to get along with each other, it's also true that the people who created the state of Israel, they also were the same people. They shouldn't have been able to get along with each other, but for a minute, they were all smiling. For a minute. Remember the Brisker Rav, they asked the Brisker, well, how could it be? I mean, the Brisker Rov was not a Zionist. Quite the contrary. He said, okay, it's a smile from heaven. Smile from heaven. Think that's a bad thing? You think that that is something that is to be taken lightly? A smile from heaven that created the state of Israel. So you can't tell me, if you look at the newspaper, I mean, which is something that I try to avoid, but if you look at the newspaper, you see bad things. People are doing bad things. Yes, they may be having difficulty in dealing with the goodness of it all. Everybody wants to claim part of that goodness. And so the newspapers write things that are very strange. But those are the people, those difficult people are the people who created the state of Israel. For that moment, the people from different ends of the world who had different experiences and different life expectancies, for that moment, they were all able to join in the glory of the moment and the joy of that history, which somehow became the history, part of the history of the Jewish people. And yes, it was the first history of the Jewish people that we know of, where the Jews were, some were more connected to Torah and some less connected to Torah, but they all kind of were telling the same story for the moment. And that story was that there would be a state in Israel which would be Jewish and democratic. I mean, sometimes I wonder what they thought they meant. But it made sense at the moment to be inclusive, to gather the people together, to get them from far-flung areas of the world and make a new entity, something that had not been made before, a kind of recreation of Genesis, a Jewish state. And look at the Jewish state with the Jewish police force and the Jewish Ministry of Interior, school systems, yeshivot. I mean, it's all there. We are the state of Israel. And the state of Israel is a great story. It's a great story. Maybe we'll stop for a minute and I remind you. Ezra, when he led the Jews back from Babylonia to Eretz Yisrael, you think they wanted to come? You think the Jews wanted to come back to Eretz Yisrael, which was under foreign rule and was not especially attractive, and the real estate was not something you could make a big profit out of? They didn't want to come back. They didn't want to come back. A few came back. So few you could list them. You list the people who came back in the books of Divrei Yamim, Ezra, Nehemiah. They're listed. I mean, nobody's going to list the people who live in Israel today. I mean, today we have other means of doing it, but if you had to do it by hand, I mean, you'd leave it out. So they didn't want to come back, but they knew that they had to do something that guaranteed some semblance of unity. And so they started to build the Beit HaMikdash, and the Nevi'im, imagine that, they were prophets who were active at that time. At the time of Ezra and Nehemiah, they were prophets. Chagai, Zechariah, Malachi, and Chagai says, why do you tarry? Build the Beit HaMikdash, and it never worked. Between the Beit HaMikdash that Ezra and Nehemiah and Chagai and Zechariah started, and the destruction of that Beit HaMikdash by the Romans in the year 70 BCE, It was never Bayit Rishon. It was never in our imaginations, right? I'm not speaking now as a historian, but I'm speaking as an imaginer. As an imaginer, Bayit Rishon, the first temple, was wondrous. And the second temple was not really, it never was what it might have been until Herod, who was far from being righteous, came along and started rebuilding it. I mean, return. I mean, one thing you learn from Ezra is that return to the homeland is difficult. Whatever was going on in Babel for the Jews, I mean, the ones who were the achievers, the ones who accomplished what they wanted to accomplish, the ones who were economically independent. I mean, all of those people didn't come back. The people who came back were other people, poor people, simple people, people who had no obvious choice. And when they came back to a situation which the Torah had completely become unnecessary. The Kohen Gadol, the high priest, was married to a non-Jewish woman, something that is quite remarkable. You can imagine that as being a part of today's story. So if you start the story from Ezra and Nehemiah, and you see that redemption is not the answer to all the questions. Just coming to Eretz Yisrael is not enough, but you have to create the tension that enables people to keep the Torah. Because that's the unifying force that the Jewish people always depended upon. And so Ezra came and he said, we're going to unify things through Torah. And that's the beginning of a story. That's the beginning of a story. You could say that Ezra was partially successful, ultimately unsuccessful, but finally the Jewish people settled upon the Torah as the primary unifying force. But the story continues. We said earlier that the people who made the state of Israel were not necessarily interested in the Torah. Some of them were, but not all. Most of them were not interested. But in the course of the history of the state of Israel, the Torah as a unifying force for the Jewish people in Eretz Yisrael and in the diaspora, and their ability to work together, and their ability to build together all the forces and energy of the Jewish people, that has a lot to do with the de facto acceptance of the Torah as a unifying force, in my opinion. I'm prepared to argue the case. So there's a story which doesn't start from Yetziat Mitzrayim. It's not Zechel Yetziat Mitzrayim, but it starts maybe from Ezra. Ezra said, we can do it. We could do it. Whoever will come back with me will be able together to build something. And whatever happened in between the time that Ezra came back to Eretz Yisrael and the time in 1948 when the state of Israel was declared, it's a story. It's a story. And we had to discover how we could do it together, all of us. And we did it together. We did it together around the Torah. That became the unifying force. Now, I know that not everybody sees the Torah quite the same way, but that's okay. In the time of the Tanaim and the time of the Amoraim, there were differences of opinion. And those differences of opinion were necessary. They produced good results. when there's a difference of opinion, you're able to clarify your own position. Difference of opinion doesn't mean that you have to throw things at each other, but it means you have to thank each other for helping to clarify and to make it possible to have a determination. And that's the truth of Torah learning. I mean, people who learn the Torah, they say, how come everything is in dispute? It's like kind of like it is at home. I'd rather go to the library. The answer is that dispute is constructive. And even today, in Israel's difficult time, the war that's going on for the next milestone will be 2 years. Members of Knesset think that if they yell, they've accomplished something. It's kind of a little strange, but they're not telling the story. They're not thinking about the achievement. They're not thinking about how good everything is, how much we've accomplished, how much we can do. And that's the story. So it's the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim, which we tell on Pesach, but it's a story that we have to keep telling all the time. And then there's the story of Ezra, a story that took place after the Galut Babel, after the Babylonian exile. And then there's the story of the Torah, whether you keep the mitzvot or think that you don't keep the mitzvot, the story of the Torah is there. It's a story that should be told. It's who we are. It's who we are. You know, sometimes you look at the Gemara. The Gemara is like, a wealth of all kinds of things that sometimes are more understood and sometimes a little more difficult to understand. But very often we find solace. We who learn the Torah and the Gemara, we find solace in things that are said. I want to tell you something that it says in the Gemara. In the Gemara Sanhedrin, Daf Tzavdi Chet Amud Aleph. And what the Gemara is trying to figure out is, do we have a guarantee that at the end it'll be okay? I would say do we have a guarantee if we tell the story that the end will be as it should be? So just a line in the Gemara is on Daf Tzadi Chet Amud Aleph in Sanhedrin, for those of you who like to check. The Gemara says, Omar Rabbi Yochanan, you lived in Eretz Yisrael, and he and his son-in-law, Reish Lakish, are responsible for the Talmud Yerushalmi. I don't know exactly what that means, that they were, but let's agree that they were people of great significance. I mean, the Talmud is kind of the glue that became necessary for the redefinition of the Jewish people. And the Talmud was created in two places, one in Bavel and the other in Eretz Yisrael. And Rabbi Yochanan was responsible to some degree, in some way, for the Talmud of Eretz Yisrael. So he said this here, Rabbi Yochanan said something. I mean, why did he say it? I don't know. Who did he say it to? I don't know that either. But if you imagine that he said it to us here today, to you, to me, it becomes really interesting. Ein ben David ba ele bedor shekulo zakai o kulo chaya. Ein ben David ba. There's this idea that there's a Messiah, that the Mashiach will come, that somebody will come who will be responsible for a better world. Again, these things are not clearly defined, but they're important to us. They're important for all of us. that it's not just we're not just wasting our time. We're doing something important. Ein ben David ba'ela says, what is the thing that's going to determine the coming of the Messiah? I know that this has been an interesting question. What did Rabbi Yochanan say about it? What did Rabbi Yochanan say? Ele bedor shekulo zakai, o bedor shekulo chayav. Imagine that. He says either we'll get to the point where everybody will deserve zakai, will be innocent. To be innocent, I mean, everybody will have the quality of innocence. He'll deserve the Mashiach. He'll be a worthy repository for the efforts of the Mashiach. If you compare it to Ezra, Ezra was not the Mashiach, but not everything that he did was met with a positive response. But if Kulo Zakai, if everybody is innocent, if everybody is a good person, if everybody is deserving, then the Mashiach will appear. It's like saying the Mashiach is an add-on. I mean, if everybody is Zakai, if everybody is innocent, everybody is good, everybody's doing what he should be doing, and you don't need the Mashiach, I guess. But Rabbi Yochanan said, no, that's when you get the Mashiach. Oshe kulo chayav. Oshe kulo chayav meaning if everybody in the world, if all the Jews in the world are guilty, guilty of what? They're guilty, more guilty than they are innocent. As the Rambam says, that if you had some way of counting, you'd have more minus than plus. If everybody is guilty, then the Mashiach will come. Rabbi Yochanan didn't, I mean, who is he talking to, Rabbi Yochanan? Who is he encouraging? I mean, we certainly don't live in a world that's kulo chayab or kulo zakai. The idea that everybody is the same is something that is unacceptable in the modern world. Everybody is different. And everybody's worldview and way he treats himself and his world that he lives in is different one from the other. So what did Rabbi Yochanan think? He'd be thinking Eretz Yisrael at the time of Rabbi Yochanan, there was an opportunity for everybody to be the same, and they would all be either worthy or unworthy. After all, that's what, again, the Gemara says, Ein ben David ba. There's no Messiah. Don't expect the Messiah. Ella bedor shekulo zakai. Oh, kulo chayav. Oh, kulo chayav. And then he quotes psukim that are relevant to his position. But what could that position possibly mean? Kulo chayav, I think I understand that better. What could kulo chayav mean? That everybody is guilty. Everybody is guilty. So we know that in some ultimate sense, starting with the covenant between Avram Avinu and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, between Avram, our great father, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, this covenant, this agreement, this brit between those two sides, ever since that covenant was established, we have a promise that we will be redeemed. And that promise is expressed clearly in the book of Devarim, chapter 30, in the Parshat HaTshuvah, the section about redemption, about Teshuvah. So Rabbi Yochanan might have said, if everybody's guilty, then that forces HaKadosh Baruch Hu to save us. There's no other possibility, according to Rabbi Yochanan. He wasn't saying we should attempt to get to that stage. What he's saying is that ultimately we are redeemable. We're going to be redeemed. And if you start telling the story from Avram Avinu, you understand that redemption is a necessary result. But when is it a necessary result? In Kulo Chayav, if everybody is guilty. If everybody is guilty. What about everybody being innocent? What about everybody being innocent? So it may be that Ben David is not really necessary. It's not really necessary. And maybe that's what Rabbi Yochanan meant. So I would say, again, we're talking about Yom HaAtzmaut, Wednesday night, Thursday. And I say that when you think about things, you have to think of them in terms of a story. And we learned that from Pesach. On Pesach, we're enjoined to tell a story because it makes it all live. It's all current. It's all real. And that's Pesach. And that teaches us that when we think about other events in history, we have to think about them as part of a story. And we have to tell the story. And we have to know where we came from and where we're going to some extent. And so we tell the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim. We tell the story of Ezra. We tell the story of modernity. We tell the stories that are connected to the Eretz Yisrael and Yom HaAtzmaut that we know. And so I wish you all a Chag Sameach, all the best to you. And Yez Hashem, we'll have a better story to tell next year. Be well.